Conant.
Present.
Bruce Johnson. Here. Todd Kimmelshoe.
Here.
Bo Shepherd.
Here.
Sean Harris.
Here.
Grace Espandola.
Here.
Charlie Hoppin.
Yes.
Drew Stresser.
Here.
And Mike Morris.
Here.
Thank you.
So we have a quorum? Okay. Let's stand and salute the flag. Salute. Pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And now is the time for public comment. The public can comment on anything they would like to in regards to Sutter Butte Flood Control Agency.
Thank you, Grace. Tara, do you know if we have any public comment? Anybody
No, we
on
don't.
board, online?
No public comment.
Okay, anybody from the audience? Okay, then we'll move on. Okay, so we'll move on to the consent agenda. Is there anything that anyone would like to remove from the consent agenda? Looks like there are 3 items. Okay, is there anybody from the public that wants anything removed? Tara?
No.
Okay. I would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Move to approve, Conant.
Second.
Okay, that's Matt Conant made the motion and
I second.
Mike Morris did the second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Okay, opposed? All right, that passes. I will turn it over now to Michael Bissett.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome everybody. It's great to see everyone here in attendance and get back together. So it's been a long time coming, so I'm really glad to see everybody here today. So this item before you is an item I've been briefing the board about pretty much monthly on the development impact fee, on the coordination that has been occurring with the city of Yuba City. So just to provide you a little background, and I'll jump into the PowerPoint. So the city of Yuba City has been collecting a development impact fee, a flood or a levee repair component of their development impact fee since about 2006. And Sutter County collects it within the sphere of influence of Yuba City. So both of those entities collected a levee fee, and the ultimate goal was to use that money to improve the levee systems. And the city had calculated that fee back in the day based on their assumptions of what it would take to improve the levee system, protecting the city, all the levees surrounding, what that value of improvements would be, and that's how they calculated their fee. Since that time, the city has been looking to update their development impact fee, and they reached out to SBFCA because, for the levy component of that fee, for us to help them recalculate it and to update that fee based on all current information. And I'll go through all of that in a few moments. And that's what spurred this whole item on. So I'm going to walk you through our discussions with the city and what we're looking for from the board today. So this is informational. We're hoping to get some direction back from the board to staff on how to proceed. We're going to have some recommendations on how we think best to proceed, and then we'll have discussions and open it up for questions to the board. So next slide, please. So the purpose of today, so SBFCA's charge, and I'm going to sort of read these so that I get it all correctly, but our charge is to implement urban level of protection, 200-year in the urban areas, which is basically the top 2/3 of our basin, and provide 100-year protection in the rural southern portion of our basin. And this charge is reflected in both SBFCA's strategic plan and in the assessment district engineers report produced back in 2010. There's additional funding that's needed to complete SBFCA's charge. So the funding that we have today is not adequate to fully produce or to complete the charges produced by SBFCA through its strategic plan. So up until June of 21, Yuba City and Sutter County had a development impact fee to fund levee improvements, as I specified earlier. SBFCA has coordinated with Yuba City to transfer those funds from that program, and we expect that the city's collected, well, a little over $1.7 million. They're going to keep a portion of that for all of their administrative work that they've been doing for flood protection, and they'll be able to transfer about $1.7 million over to SBFCA to use for levee improvements. Yuba City just recently rescinded that fee in June with the understanding that SBFCA was contemplating a regional fee, which is what we're talking about today. So today's presentation and the purpose of this agenda item is to brief the board on a regional development impact fee program and to receive feedback from the board and direction on next steps. So next slide, please. So let's get into some of the details on what we're talking about. So SBFCA regional levee impact fee concept, this would cover the entire Sutter Butte basin. So, and we have a map in a different slide, but it's basically SBFCA's boundaries. And it contains both a portion of Butte County within SBFCA's boundary and Sutter County within SBFCA's boundary. It considers the full scope of SBFCA's levee program, which reflects all improvements needed to meet SBFCA's charge. So all the projects that are needed in addition to what we've already completed to this day. And we've based a detailed analysis on planned development within our jurisdiction. So all the land use agencies, we've worked with their planning staffs to project out through their general plans, future development on like a 30-year horizon. So we would work in conjunction with all funding received by SBFCA, all current and expected future grants. We've incorporated that into our analysis. SBFCA's existing assessment district, so the money that we get through the existing assessment district, that's included in our study. And the amount of funding expected to be generated by the fee considers the assessment district existing grants and reflects an assumption on future state cost sharing for remaining projects. So we made assumptions as to future cost sharing through the state and or federal government, and we've included that in our calculations. Next slide, please. So just a reminder, the fee boundary is consistent with SBFCA's boundaries. So we're not talking about anything outside of SBFCA's jurisdiction. So we're talking about the areas up Butte County and the kind of the light green area, and then the remainder Sutter County within the SBFCA basin. Next slide, please. So fee requirements. So for development impact fees, there's Assembly Bill 1600 requires a nexus study be performed and adopted by an entity. The nexus study identifies the purpose of the fee and it identifies the use of the fee. It also determines the relationship between the use of fee and the type of development that's proposed to occur, the need for the facility and type of development, and the amount of the fee and cost of the facility. And I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. Next slide, please. So the fee funded costs. So these are the numbers that we've incorporated into our analysis to date. And it's not fully vetted. We want to get more direction from the board. But because of the work we did with Yuba City up to this point, we've been able to calculate a lot of the AB 1600 work already that would be needed. So that we have that pretty much done. So we're looking at a $625 million program of improvements needed to achieve urban level of protection in the north, which is 200-year, and 100-year protection in the south. And we're looking at we've incorporated the Feather River West levee system, Sutter Bypass East levee projects, phases 1 through 3. That's what we've identified through our small communities studies to date. We've identified projects along the Sutter Bypass East levee, and we've phased them, 3 phases. And then there's also urban levee design criteria compliance projects. And what that is as the Corps and the state continue to evaluate our systems, they do these, what they call periodic inspections. They do those every 5 years. There's elements that we've corrected through the Feather River West Levee project, but there's other elements that are still out there that weren't life safety elements, and it didn't preclude us from achieving 200-year, but it could in the future prevent us from maintaining a PL 8499 status through the Army Corps for rehabilitation assistance during emergencies. So we've identified some projects, and the Corps has just recently completed their inspections, and we'll be getting the results of those within the next 2 to 3 months. But there are outstanding projects that we've identified, and we've accounted for those in this fee study. Also, program revenues. So those are that's the expenditures, is the $625 million. The revenues we've accounted for is approximately $604 million, and that's all of these revenue sources that we have listed here. So the net fee funded that we need to fund through this program is approximately $21 million. Next slide, please. So here's the plan development. So working with the planning departments within the cities and counties within our jurisdiction, and looking at general plan information and projecting that over a 30-year timeline. This is the gross acreage for build out of new development. And as you can see, the majority of it will be happening, is proposed to be happening in Live Oak and City of Yuba City. Next slide, please. So as a result of accounting for all the information I just presented in terms of total project costs versus revenues that we have projected or have had achieved, we've projected these rates. And what I'd like to mention, and it is specified on the next slide, but what I wanted to mention here is these impact fee rates are a substantial reduction compared to the rates that the City of Yuba City and the Sutter County has been collecting to date. It's like less than a third of what they've been collecting to date. So it's a drastic reduction, and that's based on real costs and real revenues. So it's a nice update. I think the city, in my discussions with City of Yuba City, they were very receptive to these numbers, and they're looking forward to working with us in the future once we get through our process, and I'll talk about that process in a minute. Next slide, please. So here's the breakdown. So you can see on the middle column, the proposed SBFCA fee estimated. Single family residential, about $898. City of Yuba City was collecting about $3,900. So as you can see, drastic reduction compared to what the city had been collecting just recently. And then you look at the other land use types, and you can see accordingly drastic reductions in those proposed fees as well. Next slide, please. So in terms of fee implementation, so what we would ideally receive from the board today is some direction back to staff. But here's the steps that it would take to implement this fee. So we would need the SBFCA board to approve a nexus study compliant with AB 1600, and also a fee collection agreement with each of the land use agencies. So we would produce that, the staff of SBFCA would produce that. We would produce the nexus study, and we would produce the fee collection agreement in negotiations with each of the land use agencies within the SBFCA. The fee would be adopted pursuant to AB 1600 by each land use agency. So once each of the land use agencies agreed to move this forward, they would adopt the nexus study that had been approved by this board and the collection agreement, and then start implementing this component, levy fee component, to their overall impact fee program. Next slide, please. So the next steps. So essentially, this is my last slide on this topic. So staff seeks input from the board on a proposed regional levy impact fee program. Should staff proceed with a regional fee concept? So that's what we want to have a dialogue with the board today after I'm done presenting these slides, is to discuss the need for this program, the steps necessary to implement the program, and then receive direction back from the board saying, staff, yes, go ahead, finalize that nexus study, take it back to this board for adoption, work at the same time, work with each of the land use agencies to brief them on this concept and get their agreement on implementing this process. That's the ideal next steps going forward. We're close because of the work we did, like I said earlier, with the city of Yuba City's staff and the mayor and the vice mayor. We pretty much have a nexus study, maybe like a draft 80% done. We can finalize that within a month or two. And ideally, we could take it back to this board in October, November timeframe for adoption or for consideration of adoption, and then work with each of the land use agencies to do what they need to do per AB 1600 to make that happen. So I'm going to conclude there. I'd like to also ask Scott to say a few words. So based on my negotiations with the city of Yuba City, the city staff or the mayor and vice mayor, they wanted each of the entities that they're collecting impact fees for to go out and do their own independent nexus studies and adopting those, and then the city would collect those for that entity. So for instance, SBFCA, school districts, but like police, fire, parks, the money that the city gets through development impact fees that they utilize themselves, they take care of that. But they wanted the other entities to do their own process, so that in the future, if a developer came in and started questioning, what that fee is for, is it justified, and getting into those details, the city, the land use agency could say, that's SBFCA's fee, go talk to SBFCA, we're collecting it for them, and they would come and talk to us. So we would take not the pressure, but the situation out of the city's hands and put it back onto SBFCA, because this is a fee for levee improvements. And then before I turn it over to Scott, so when we went back to do that, to look at whether SBFCA could implement that fee on its own and then have the cities collect it for us, we found out legally that SBFCA has a JPA that includes non-land use agencies. Legally, we can't do that. SBFCA can't just implement a fee on new development in and of itself. They have to work with a land use agency, and that's the process we would like to move forward on now. So Scott, I don't know if you want to say I kind of covered it, but if you have anything else in terms of the legalities of it, I would welcome your comments.
Thank you, Michael. Members of the board, nice to see you in person today. I don't have much substantively to add. Maybe I'll just say some of it in different words, because hearing it multiple times sometimes helps it make sense. So we are a regional entity. We were formed by you to solve a regional problem. We have solved much of that problem, as Michael indicated, and as the staff report and the PowerPoint shows. We're 21 million short from our belief of solving that regional problem. The question is what's the best mechanism for collecting that from future development, which has not contributed through assessments or other fees thus far. And we would love to be able to bring you the regional development impact fee that this board approves, and we don't have to deal with the land use agencies. It's certainly been the approach we've taken to date in trying to solve this regional problem so that the individual cities and counties don't have to solve that problem. Unfortunately, due to some detailed legal analysis that I can go through if anybody cares to, either now or after the meeting, we're just not in a position to do that. So what we're doing is proposing a hybrid where we will take the lead, we will develop the study, we will coordinate with your staff, we will make sure it has acceptable buy-in, we will adopt it, and then hand it to the 6 land use agencies and ask that you do the same, and then collect it and hand it over to us so we can finish this regional problem. happy to answer any questions, as I'm sure Michael is as well.
No, Yuba City has those fees, so that's inclusive of the Sutter County fees. Yep.
So I think it's our intention to have a discussion, right, about
Correct.
this. And so anybody that has comments, Mike, go ahead.
So since this is how I'm thinking, since we've already started doing this, it'd be kind of, I'd want to move forward with it so we don't waste the time or the energy that staff's already worked on it for, if that makes any sense.
To the chair.
Yes, go ahead, Bo.
I agree with Michael. We've come a long way. We need to get across the goal line, and, this is the next step.
Other comments?
Just to the chair, so I think that it is important that we come up with a solution. This looks like this is the only viable alternative since the Butte couldn't do it on her own and the agencies can together. But I think it is important that we go with a unified front, that we all do it together. Now, will we all cross the goal line the same day? That probably won't happen, but that we have that common goal to get there together.
Okay.
And I'll just say on that in addition to our commitment to coordinate with the land use agency staff, you all know that Michael Bissett does a great road show, and he'll show up at cities and counties and help explain the regional concept of the work we've been doing over the last 10 plus years.
Agreed. That will be needed. So any one of us that tries to explain it would probably mess it up. So,
Through the chair,
yes.
especially through the smaller districts, you know what I mean? Like your Meridians and Sutters and so forth. That's where you're gonna really need your districts and so forth, you know what I mean? Those outer.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and so in this case, the fee can only be collected by an incorporated entity. So the 2 counties can, and the 4 cities that sit up here. For a community like Meridian, which is actually outside of the Sutter Basin, they wouldn't be affected. But if you think instead of Dingville, right, the thriving metropolis of Dingville, Dingville would rely on the county for its development impact fee adoption since it's not an incorporated city. So each of those little communities will get picked up by the counties. Now that probably means that our supervisors here will hear from people in those communities, but there won't be an adoption by those communities themselves.
Okay, and remember, this is only on new development, correct?
Correct.
This would only be fees on new development. Okay.
It would apply to any development which receives a governmental approval 30 days after the city or the county approves the development impact fee. So realistically, we're not even talking about anything that's likely that's going to happen in 2021.
Through the chair, now, what would this go to, like the 84 home subdivision in Sutter that was?
That wouldn't be affected. Well, it might, maybe.
Well, I mean, because they haven't, that's in litigation right now over CEQA right now. So I'm curious,
Are they in the influence area that would be affected by
I thought they were.
Well, have they received building permits already or not yet?
No, there has not been any building permits issued.
If they're were they in an influence area? Mike?
I believe they weren't.
I was trying to remember if they are in or out. They're
It was
barely
right there
in.
by, or maybe it ends by Acacia Avenue, right there.
Is it in Sutter? Is it the town of
it's-
Sutter?
Butte House, it's Sutter, just say, yeah, Sutter and Butte
Yeah.
House.
So if it's within the Sabufka jurisdiction,
Which
then it
is-
would be.
That is a
covered.
Sabufka jurisdiction.
So the county would collect that.
Yeah.
Now, the
That's what I mean.
process.
I was just making sure.
It's going to take months. So we would anticipate, if we got direction to proceed, the staff would bring back the Nexus study to the board for adoption, probably in October or November timeframe. And then we would go out to the land use agencies and they would have to do their adoption process through the AB 1600 process. So they would have to have a public hearing and move forward. So that would probably roll into next year. And then, like Scott said, 30 days after it's approved, that's when the fees would be collected at that point going forward. So it would be next year.
Okay, any other comments? So Michael, what do you need from us today? Do you need an actual motion and approval to move forward with this?
Well, I'm going to ask my attorney. We were just looking for direction from the board, but
You know, I think in this case, a motion's not required, but it might be nice as a way of showing regional unanimity. And now, obviously, it's not for any action other than finish up a draft of the Nexus study and bring it back to us for our consideration and coordinate with our land use agencies.
I'll make the motion.
Okay, that motion, Tara, did you get that, the wording?
I was just saying that.
Okay, and second, okay, we got it, I'm sorry. Mike, motion, Grace seconded, go ahead.
I was just going to make a
Discussion?
motion. I mean, word it, because we need to say, board directs staff to.
So,
Do the studies, and let's move forward with this.
all right, second to the motion.
Are you okay with that, Michael?
yes.
Scott, you okay with that? All right. So the motion is on the floor. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor of the motion, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, thank you. Exciting times.
All right, thank you.
More work for you, Michael.
Yes.
And Scott, yeah, that's right.
Actually, a lot of work for Seth, who's sitting in the audience. He's been the laboring
He's the guy with the
RMS.
mask on, we
He's
don't
great
see
work.
him. Okay, well, in that case, anything else on item 4, Michael? Or is that good?
No, that'll do it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So we will move on to Seth, I guess, in the presentation of the monthly financial report.
All right, is this on? Okay. Well, thank you for that, Scott. Yeah, we've prepared an administrative internal draft of the Nexus study, and we'll work to finalize that and take that to each of the member agency staffs for review. So this is your regular monthly financial report. We provided those at the dais for the last 2 months because we didn't have a board meeting last month. But I'm only going to be reviewing the report through June 30. So at month ending June 30, we had 18.2 million in working capital. And with respect to the accrued revenues and expenses that have been received to date, we have about 20.75 million. Our operating revenues still reflect 280,000 for the fiscal year, but will ultimately reflect 750,000 after we make some accounting adjustments. That's our standard operating amount. We take the first 750,000 and allocate that to operations each year, and the balance goes toward our capital projects. There's just some money movement that needs to take place between our capital and operating funds for that. Our capital revenues, considering all the assessments received, were 12.85 million for the year and 17.23, which is reflective of the accrued revenues. The $4.4 million difference is on the next slide. It's hard to see on this. There's an ultimate listing of all the pending payments and for the year and actual payments. But in general, I can kind of summarize that for you. In the first section of the table on the right, we have our WCB grant for the Orville Wildlife Area. When you look at all those payments, there's about 1.5 million total for the Wildlife Conservation Board that's pending. So that's the first 1.5 million of the 4.5 difference in accrued revenues. The next section is our CDFW grants. There's about 294,000. CDFW grant, sorry, there's no pending payments there. Those are all received. The next one after that is our CNRA grant. There's about 294,000 of pending payments from the Natural Resources Agency. Another 44,000 approximately from DWR for our small communities grants. and then another $2.5 million that we're waiting on for our UFR grant. So that's makes up that total of an additional $4.4 million of revenue that is pending. You can see the total assessment collections to date here, about $6.7 million. So in terms of our expenditures to date, for the fiscal year, we've spent about $8.3 million. This is the breakdown between the projects, primarily expenses related to the OWA project incurred through our UFR grant. Our financing, our next debt service payment is about $1.77 million due in October. We'll make that payment in late or mid-September, and that'll complete our debt service payments for the year. Okay, and then in terms of our funding agreements, again, we're administering the UFR agreement, working on payments and retention releases, that $2.5 million that I mentioned. We're working on coordinating on the closeout of the Feather River West Levee project related elements of our UFR agreement. There will be some components of that agreement that stay open because there's funding from other sources besides Prop 1E. Our Wildlife Conservation Board and CDFW grants, we're continuing to process reimbursements and working on closeout of phases 1 and 2 grants from the Wildlife Conservation Board. In terms of the agency-wide efforts, we're starting our annual audit. I think the auditor should be on site sometime in September or October, but we've already coordinated and engaged them. And we're also helping support the Farlefa JPA. And then the main effort right now has been on the regional levy impact fee, preparing the calculations that you all saw in the last item. So that's everything that we've got going on from a financial perspective. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them now.
Any questions?
Thank you very much.
We just accept this. We don't need a motion.
No motion, just information.
Great. Okay.
Very much.
Thank you very much.
Oh, sure. Yes, yes. We're since our switch over several years ago from our prior administrator, everything's working a-okay right now. So we're all caught up. In fact, just yesterday on Tuesday was the deadline for the initial submission of the assessment rolls to the auditor controllers of each county, and those were submitted on behalf of Sutter Butte by Will Dan, our current administrator. And so we've got those all done. Michael was signing off on everything yesterday. They'll go through their check process, and then if there's any rejections on that initial submission, it'll be reflective of perhaps parcel splits and things like that, APNs that maybe aren't up to date. There'll be a reconciliation of that roll at the end of the month. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Seth. Okay, and the last item is a presentation by Michael in regards to ongoing projects.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is our last item for this board meeting. And so since our last board meeting, we skipped July. We didn't have any action items for the board, so you had a little summer hiatus there. So since that time, we got our permit. So I think the last I was telling you in June was we were, dealing with the Army Corps and the SHPO and all the permits we needed for these sediment removal projects. Well, they all fell into place at the very end of July, and a contractor was ready and started work like the very next day. So we have 2 ongoing projects, one up in Live Oak at the Live Oak boat ramp. That project should be completed within the next week or 2. It's only a 2 to 3 week actual construction project, and so it's going very well. They will wrap up by the end of this month. All the work will be completed, and we'll close out that contract. It's the same contractor, Dixon Marine, who's also doing our Yuba City project, and that project started end of July. And our contractor will be working at least 6 days a week, basically 10 to 12-hour days, going forward into the middle of October to get all the work done. We may include Sundays, depending on where we're going, because we got a little bit of a late start because of the permit process. So we may need to work Sundays to get the entire amount, the volume of sediment removal per the contract completed by that time. So our window cuts off at October 15th due to our permits. So the contractor's doing very good work out there, and we're keeping close tabs on his activities. We held a media event yesterday, and our vice chair, Grace, did a wonderful job presenting the project, and we had Senator Nielsen there, Assemblymember Jim Gallagher. We had a representative from DWR, and we also had James Stone from the Fisherman's Guide Club, who were speakers. So it was a very well-attended event. It was a great kickoff for our project. We had the sediment removal rigs right in the background, and I think there's a video on the Yuba City website. We're going to try to, if Tara can get it, we'll try to pull it over to our website also. But thank you, Grace. You did a wonderful job. So
Thanks,
that was,
Michael.
you'd like to
One
say a few words?
No, thank you. Your team did an amazing job putting it together, and very appreciative of Assemblyman Gallagher and Senator Nielsen for helping us get this funding. One question that often was asked is, where do we put all that we're taking out? Where are we moving it to?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and it's a really good aspect of the project. And Chris Fritz was the project manager for this project. So Chris worked very closely with the city of Marysville, and the city of Marysville has wastewater ponds on the opposite side of the river, directly right there at the confluence of the Yuba and the Feather, and they're decommissioning those ponds, and we're pumping all of this sludge sediment into those ponds to help them decommission those ponds. So it really minimizes the overall project cost because we don't have to truck that material anywhere to like a disposal site. We're just pumping it right there, and it'll remain there. That was a complicating factor of our Army Corps permits, but we got that all figured out, and so that's where it's going. And I'd also like to, oh, sorry, Mike, I'd like to, Kim Floyd's on the website here, and Kim did a lot of work to set this thing up too, so I want to thank Kim for that. Sorry, go ahead, Mike.
Through the chair, if they're working Saturdays at overtime, isn't that even bringing down our, we have only so much money to dredge whatever we can. So with the working Saturdays and Sundays and overtime or whatsoever, because they're not doing it straight time, is that bringing down the funding, you get what I'm saying, faster than normal?
Yeah, they incorporated the Saturday work and the 12-hour day work into their bid pricing. So that's part of their contract. If we do Sundays, that will be additional costs, and we're evaluating that right now, whether we want to do that and to see what those cost impacts would be, and do we have enough money in the grant to support that.
For me, it's tough to get giddy over a little bit of dredging. You know what I mean? It's a win, but it's, you know, there's so much more to work. And I tell James Stone and the others, I said, look, man, look how much this is costing right here. And how many miles are we doing right here?
For the dredging?
Yeah.
Oh, not much. I mean, it's right there at the confluence, at the boat ramp
But
and the Yuba.
Everyone
miles, it's feet.
assumes, they don't really, it's $10 million.
No, it's a $5 million.
I'm sorry, $5 million.
And it's all 100% grant funded,
That's
so.
$5 million though.
Yeah.
But everyone, grant, where does it come from?
Through the chair, the problem is, though, it's taking us forever to get this far to do this job, and the permit process took forever. I mean, it's nobody's fault, it's just that government wheels move very slowly. I'd like to get as much done as we could for the minimum cost possible. But, you know, if it doesn't cost too much more, maybe we have to do some on Sundays. I mean, just to get it done, because you're not going to go back to that horse again and do it next year.
Yeah, and we're only going to
You're gonna
fund
be
as
able to
much
take
as.
tobacco in there next year.
Charlie?
Maybe
I think Charlie had something?
Mr. Chairman, I've consumed all the chocolate that council gave us before the meeting, and now it's time for me to eat a little crow, because when Michael Bissett first announced that they were going to work on this project, I said, that's all good and well. No, I'm being sarcastic about it. I said something to the effect, that's all well intended, but it's going to be a cold day in hell that you get all the permits. And that might not have been the exact language, but it was pretty close to it. And I would like to acknowledge that I was pleasantly wrong, and to thank Michael and Scott for what they did, because people don't just go get a permit and dredge the river anymore. I mean,
No.
This was an extraordinary effort, and I want to thank you.
Thank you. And I do want to remind the board.
Oh, I enjoyed it.
I want to remind the board and the public that this is 100% state funded. It was a grant from the Natural Resources Agency directly to SBFCA. It's to help mitigate for the events up in Oroville back in 2017. So we're not using any assessment district dollars, any SBFCA levy improvement dollars. It's all 100% grant funded. And we're only going to do whatever work we can do within that grant amount.
So I wanted to say also that when Tara does send you this YouTube video, hopefully you all can watch YouTube videos. It's very good. It's very impressive. And I couldn't make it because I had a board of supervisor meeting. So Grace stepped in. It's probably better that Grace did it anyway because she's much better looking and a better speaker. But the bottom line is I think it's good that we pat ourselves on the back on some of these things and let the public know what we're doing, that we just don't exist and we, fix levees once in a while. And then when we do get the final levee project finished up, then we're going to have a big celebration. Right. And I wish Charlie was there yesterday so he could have said just what he said there. Is that, it is a huge, huge undertaking to get some dredging done in any waterway in California.
Yeah.
So.
And just going back to what Charlie said, I do want to congratulate Chris Fritz for, getting through that permit process and getting pulled through those knotholes with all the resource agencies. So it was definitely a team effort.
No, it was a great victory. So well done.
Okay, so
I'm sorry.
that's
Go
the
ahead,
sediment
Matt. One more.
removal
Matt
project.
wants to speak real quick.
Oh, sorry.
And you still have hair. That's amazing. But no, how many cubic yards are we anticipating we're actually going to remove this year?
So for this Yuba City contract, it's 65,000 cubic yards.
And what about Live Oak? What's that one do?
Very small. I think it's, Chris, do you know the cubic yards up in Live Oak? It's yeah, so it's a really small amount.
3,000 to 4,000 yards? Oh.
Now, but we do have, our permits allow us to do additional work. If we can get additional grant money, we can expand upon the Yuba City project considerably. And we're still applying for money, for grant money.
I know it.
Okay, so I want to continue on. For Feather River West Levee project, Seth talked about, we're still working with our DWR partner on our grant-funded work. We're still in the process of real estate acquisitions. We're very close to finalizing all of them. All the eminent domain projects that or acquisitions that we went through the board on 2 to 3 months ago, or even longer now, they're all being finalized through the court process, which is great news. We're working with PG&E on a couple of items, utility easement issues, and Caltrans also on one of our areas. So there's government agencies and utility companies that we're working with. We're still working on our environmental mitigation. That's the Star Bend and Matthews sites. We're still working with our resource agency partners on those, getting closer to the end, but we're still in process there. Cultural resources, we're still finalizing our documents, going through the Army Corps process on those items. Still finalizing our O&M manuals. We're having a little problem getting the Army Corps to finalize the process. We've done all our work. We're just waiting for their reviews and if any comments, and then we can finalize those documents. And then as our chairman alluded to, so we're looking to take a very large item to this board in October for our 200-year certification. We're going to be the first agency in the Central Valley to achieve that milestone. We're looking to have speakers from both DWR and the Central Valley Board, ideally Bill Edgar, who is the first executive director of this board, who actually helped bring this JPA, form the JPA. Love to have him as a speaker. So we're starting to work on that. Our engineering team is finalizing that finding, that 200-year certification document, and we're looking forward to taking that to the board in October. And then lastly, after that is all said and done and all the real estate's acquired and all these other items are completed, we can close out our grant with the state. We can transfer all the real estate over to the Central Valley Flood Protection Board via the SSJDD. which is the Sacramento-San Joaquin Drainage District. That's the entity that holds property. And then just finalize all the work to do there. So that's ongoing, but we're making good progress. Next slide, please. This is the last slide. So we're still working on our DWR Small Communities grant. So that's our Sutter and Tudor communities, focused mostly on Sutter Bypass East Levee improvements. We're doing some work through the existing amendment through that grant. We have $300,000 available that we're utilizing for additional geotechnical analysis and some environmental analysis. We're having constant communications with DWR to try to wrap our arms around some more funding to start on some critical levee repairs along the Sutter Bypass East Levee. Director Hoppen has been engaged with DWR's Director Nemeth on advocating for funding. We also have our political support through Assemblymember Gallagher and Senator Nielsen. So we're doing everything we can. Chris Fritz and I have a meeting later this month with DWR staff to present our geotechnical analysis to justify our position on why this is needed, why we need to advance these critical levee repairs. So we're making some progress. It's slower than we had hoped and way more frustrating, and I think Director Hoppen will agree to that. But we're making progress. On our regional flood management planning, we're working closely with our partners across the river, Trillia and Yuba Water Agency. We're advancing through that program, through that 100% state-funded process. We're advancing our Sutter Bypass East Levee. So whatever work we can't do with that $300,000 that I mentioned earlier, we have, I think, about $100,000 or so through the RFMP grant to advance some work and better define the project that we want to take on. We're going to soon be kicking off that Cherokee Canal Corridor Management Plan. Chris and I are going to be reaching out to the Sutter Yard folks and setting up a series of meetings to define basically what their needs are. They're the maintainers of that facility. We're trying to help them. So we're going to be setting that up in near term, and that's 100% funded through this grant. We're also advancing our OWA Robinson's Riffle, and I was hoping Bill was going to be here today, Director Connolly. We've had recent discussions with DWR, and we're looking at going after this state parks grant to do some park improvements, which we hope will help trigger more improvements up in the OWA area, because we're also looking at flood risk reduction elements, environmental restoration type work, betterments to that area, which will help us downstream. So we're advancing that work. And then lastly, on this line, it says Trillia 500 year. I wanted to talk about that a little bit. I put a little write-up in the program project update, the staff report, and we're following this very closely. So Trillia, through their state grant, their UFR grant, Urban Flood Risk Reduction Grant, they had money left over, and they negotiated with the state to get an amendment through that grant to utilize that remainder funding to analyze what it would take to bring their system up to 500 years. So they're going to be very close following us doing a 200-year certification. They wanted to understand what it would take to achieve 500 year. And the big item that helps them in that way, and it's going to help us in an undefined way at this point, is the new Bullets Bar secondary spillway. So when that secondary spillway is constructed by Yuba Water Agency, that's going to help lower flood risk to the region. It's going to lower flood stage in the Yuba and the Feather. It's going to allow our system to achieve a higher level of protection just because of the level of reduction in the rivers during certain storm events. It's all good. It's all a benefit to our region, and Trillia's looking at that right now. So they put out a notice of preparation for their environmental document. Chris and I are evaluating that. We may or may not send in a comment letter. The comment letter would essentially be, hey, that's great that you guys are doing that, but we want you to analyze any sort of transfer of risk type issues. We want you to analyze that and tell us it doesn't impact us. By you achieving 500 year, we have 200 year. What does that mean for us? So that needs to be a part of their CEQA document, and we'll be following that. And we're working very closely with Paul Bruner, their executive director, and directly with the Yuba Water Agency. So I just wanted to bring that up. It's something we're following very closely. We're looking at if there's a chance we have any funding left over in our grant, perhaps we use that money to do our own independent study in the same nature. So wanted to highlight that. Couple other things. So our federal project, still working very closely with the Army Corps to close that out. There's lingering punch list items that Drew Stresser and I are working on, and our engineering team, to get it finalized and get it finished in the way that we feel is adequate. And at the end of the day, we can certify those 5 miles of basically core improved levees that are part of our system. We're also working with the Army Corps to perfect our federal credits for the Feather River West Levee project and that 5 mile project. At the end of the day, we're looking at about a $22 million local credit. What that means to SBFCA is we have $22 million. If the Army Corps were to do another project in our basin, we have that much credit, but we don't have another project for them to do in our basin. So we're looking to basically sell that credit to another entity in the Central Valley that can use it, and we get money for it. So we're looking at that now. We'll be having discussions with the San Joaquin SBFCA, San Joaquin Area Flood Control Agency, thank you, because they're an entity that could possibly benefit from this credit, and whether, whatever the deal is, they could buy that credit and we could both benefit from that in some manner. So we're looking at that, and I'll be bringing more information back to this board when the time is right.
Mike?
Yes, sir.
So we can't use any of that for the bypass?
No, the Corps does not have a federal interest in improving that bypass.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Well, yep, but as part of the Sutter Basin flood risk study, the feasibility study that they took through Congress, that they did not deem fixing the bypass as something that it was in their federal interest, so it wasn't included. A couple of other items and I'll wrap up. FEMA remapping of Butte County. FEMA should be issuing draft maps very soon. Chris is bird dogging them on a weekly basis. We'll be working with Butte County staff on that. We're also working with Sutter County staff on the mapping of the Sutter County basin that they could potentially utilize as best available information. And hopefully that's going to be coming to the Sutter County board very soon so they could benefit from that. And then we'll be launching on the FEMA remapping package later this year into next year when the Army Corps project is fully completed and we have those record drawings and we can package those up, develop the floodplains and show FEMA that, we're taking certain lands out of the floodplain based on the Feather River West Levee project and all the work that has been completed along the Feather River down to Highway 99. So that'll be happening later this year into next year. And the last bullet, what I wanted to highlight is our strategic plan. So I mentioned that earlier in the regional development impact fee item. We have the first strategic plan was developed in 2016. We updated that plan in 2018, I believe. I've been starting to write an update to the plan now. I would like to be able to take that to this board later this year. And essentially it takes into account all of the completed projects, all of the funding that we've acquired. It brings everything up to date, and then it looks forward. So I'll be looking to complete my work on it, run it through our staff for comments, and then I'll be able to bring a draft to the board later this year for for your review and then ultimate adoption of that. So that's where I want to conclude today, and I'll turn it back to the chairman and see if there's any questions.
Any questions of Michael? Any comments at all? Anything else? All right. I want Charlie to work his magic with the DWR so we can keep working. I know you have that. Well, I know you have that ability to make that happen. So with that, thanks to all. It's great to see everyone in person. Hopefully we continue to meet in person. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.